Welcome, folks, to this edition of the 700 Club. A rush hour explosion near Times Square in New York City this morning. The New York Police Department was on the scene after the reports of the blast, and they have the suspect in custody. Our CBN News national security correspondent Eric Rosales is with us now today. And Eric, what have you heard about this terrible tragedy?
Well, Pat, what I'm hearing right now is that the explosion did in fact occur at 42nd and 8th Street on a subway platform. Now, this is a platform that is very, very busy with people right now, with rush hour going on. Not only that, you also have Christmas shoppers in the area. As you mentioned, one person is in custody, and I did reach out to my sources, both at the FBI and also Homeland Security, and they tell me that the suspect is in fact in custody, and apparently he had pipe bombs that were strapped onto him. So this was some sort of a suicide vest that may have gone off prematurely. He may have been wanting to get inside of the subway itself when the explosion took place, but it actually took place on the platform itself. He is in custody, and he is being questioned right now by FBI authorities. We're also hearing that he is a 37-year-old man from Brooklyn, New York. So again, we do not know if this is a lone wolf that possibly was some sort of terrorist organization that he is connected to. But that's the biggest thing right now, is that we have to worry about even second or third attacks, or even a bad Samaritan type of plot where you have all the authorities and law enforcement heading on over to one area, and then in another area of town, you're going to have another explosion. So that's what they're looking at right now. Well,
ISIS threatened attacks in Times Square during Christmas. And the theory that this was attempted terrorist, I mean, this obviously was something that was supposed to disrupt our Christmas shopping and send terror to the hearts of the people?
Most definitely, Pat. You know, we have been reporting through Homeland Security and also the FBI that ISIS has, in fact, been putting together a number of posters and propaganda that has been online that they are trying to get let people know that an explosion or some sort of detonation is going to take place in Times Square. We've all seen the posters with Santa outside of Times Square and saying it's just a matter of time, or we will see you soon. You know, we are literally, the U.S. is destroying them on the battlefield in both Iraq and Syria, and now the battlefield has in fact come home to our U.S. lands here. It's in our neighborhoods. So what can people do? I did talk to the FBI, and a number of FBI agents say that people need to be aware of their surroundings. So many times when we're busy, we're on our phones, we have our heads looking down. We should be aware of what's going on. If we cannot flee from a situation like this, then we should end up hiding. And if we cannot hide, then we have to fight. We have to fight back, because we have to take more of a sheepdog mentality, where we have to be aware of our surroundings, but also be able to protect us and watch out for these type of things if in fact a threat does come in our neighborhood.
You know, Eric, we had a question last week on this program about just this very thing. They said, I'm afraid that I should go to New York, and my answer was, by all means go. They have some of the best police work in the country up there, and they're set up for this kind of a threat. Now, was this totally unexpected? Did they have any clue this thing was going to happen before it did?
No, Homeland Security had been putting out, as we mentioned, with the propaganda, the online propaganda that has been coming out of these jihad extremists, that an attack would in fact take place in New York. So my wife and I were just there this past weekend. We were there. We got on a train there in New York City to come back to Washington, D.C. last night. So we were there in Times Square just yesterday in that exact same area, and we did notice a number of police presence, an increased police presence in the area. And that's the thing. We cannot be afraid. We cannot allow these terrorist organizations to get the better hand of us, to get the upper hand of us. We have to be able to live our lives. And by all means, we know that that the man upstairs, God, is the one who is in power and puts a shield of protection around us.
You're absolutely right. Eric Rosales, thank you very much. In other news, the U.S. is being hit by both fire and ice. With snow in the east and Midwest, Ephraim Graham has that.
Pet wildfires are still blazing in Southern California, and the biggest fire is now being called the 5th largest in the state's history. Jenna Browder brings us that story.
fire and thick clouds of smoke. Dramatic video shows how the wildfires are raging up the Southern California coast and still growing.
Look at how big that is. Look at how dangerous it is.
The Santa Ana winds spreading the flames toward buildings and homes. The Thomas Fire is now the 5th largest wildfire in state history, scorching more than 300 square miles and forcing evacuations in Ventura and Santa Barbara counties.
It's really terrifying, thinking that the house that I only know that I grew up in might get burned down and I might never see it again.
The fires have destroyed nearly 800 homes and buildings and forced more than 200,000 people to flee from their homes in the last week. And some 5,700 firefighters are deployed. They're up against extremely dry conditions with just 10% containment. But on the other side of the country, people are dealing with ice and snow. More than 100 million Americans in the path of this winter blast. Lake effect snow falling from Indiana to New York. Thunder snow hitting communities like this one. And in Buffalo, near whiteout conditions for the NFL game between the Bills and the Indianapolis Colts. Icy roads are causing hundreds of crashes. This driver sliding into an icy pond, fortunately swimming to safety. And the usually mild South is still shoveling out too. At one point, roughly 300,000 people were without power.
These trees popping all over and never know when the one going to pop near us.
Behind all of this, another big chill on the way for a huge stretch of the country. In California, they are praying for rain, but none is in the forecast for this week, as firefighters face an uphill battle to contain and put out as much as they can. Jenna Browder, CBN News.
Alabama voters will decide tomorrow whether to send Republican Roy Moore or Democrat Doug Jones to Washington. Both sides see the race as a defining moment in American politics. Moore sees it as a chance to defeat liberal elites and protect President Trump's agenda, while Jones believes it as a chance to use the controversy surrounding Moore to turn a deep red state blue and give a major shot in the arm to Democrats heading into the midterms. In this final stretch, Jones has been campaigning across the state while Moore is keeping a low profile. His campaign is betting Alabama voters will not be able to stomach pulling the lever for a Democrat. Despite sexual allegations of misconduct, Moore and his staff maintain he has nothing to hide.
I highly doubt there's going to be a Senate investigation, but if there is, Judge Moore is going to be found telling the truth.
President Trump recorded a robocall supporting Moore. Richard Shelby, the senior senator from Alabama, says he did not vote for Moore. Instead, he wrote in a name that he declined to reveal. It will be a busy 2 weeks for President Donald Trump and Republicans in Congress to get their agenda accomplished by the end of the year. GOP lawmakers want to pass the first restructuring of America's tax code in 3 decades. They're looking for success after not being able to repeal Obamacare this past summer. The outcome could be a factor in what voters decide at the ballot box in the 2018 midterm elections. Republicans also are working with Democrats to avoid a holiday government shutdown. They're trying to determine how much should be spent on the military and domestic agencies. Pat?
Well, folks, it's amazing what they're doing. This tax bill hasn't been sold as well as they should have sold it to the American people, and it is still a little confusing. So many people are now saying, well, we're not in favor of it because they don't know what it's going to do. The most important thing, and it's very crucial, if they're going to have that major corporate tax reduction, they need to put it in place immediately. So the effects will be there during the next several months leading up to the election of next year. If they don't do it, they will lose a tremendous amount of political capital that they could have had otherwise. So to delay implementation would be very foolish. But right now, we're not quite sure. There was a headline today in Drudge saying, well, the Senate bill, some taxes will go up to 100%. I'm not sure. They say it's a snafu in writing the bill. So we still haven't seen the final draft, and the House and Senate conferees will have to work something out. But they've got to be very careful that they don't raise taxes for people. Unfortunately, or fortunately, however the case may be, those living in California, those living in New York, New Jersey, Illinois, and so forth, these high-tax states are going to have their taxes, probably it will cost more in tax because they will not be able to deduct their state taxes, their state and local taxes, which are so high. But this may bring a correction that will force the legislators in those states to lower taxes, which will be a good thing. But we'll see what happens. But they've sure got to get their act together. They cannot be raising taxes in a tax reduction bill. Ephraim.
Pat, more protests over the weekend throughout the Islamic world against President Trump's decision to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. Even so, the Trump administration defends its historic decision. Chris Mitchell brings us that story now from Jerusalem.
In Lebanon, an angry crowd protested outside the U.S. Embassy in Beirut. In Pakistan, a large demonstration called for Trump's decision to be reversed. And in Turkey, Turkish President Recep Erdogan called Israel a terrorist state and more.
We won't leave Jerusalem to the conscience of a state that has no value other than occupation and plunder. We will continue our struggle within law and democracy with determination.
But U.S. Ambassador to the UN Nikki Haley defended the president's decision.
We don't do things just to please every other country in the world. We do things to advance the ball. And that's what the president did with this. He said, this is time that we acknowledge reality. It's been 22 years in the making. It was time. And not only that, Chris, it's the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do. Israel should be no different.
On Sunday, a terrorist severely wounded a security guard in a stabbing attack at Jerusalem's main bus station. Protests continued in Bethlehem and other parts of the West Bank, but with smaller crowds. And Islamic groups in Gaza fired several rockets into southern Israel. During a press conference with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, France's President Emmanuel Macron condemned those attacks, while Netanyahu addressed the issue of Jerusalem.
Paris is the capital of France. Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. It's been the capital of Israel for 3,000 years. It's been the capital of the Jewish state for 70 years. We respect your history and your choices, and we know that as friends, you respect ours.
The Arab League also met in emergency session about Trump's decision, and the decision may affect Vice President Mike Pence's upcoming trip to Israel. A demonstration in Bethlehem said Pence should not visit the birthplace of Jesus. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. Pat?
You know, the Arabs hold on to these fictions. And one of the fictions is that they're going to split up Jerusalem and actually it'll be the capital of a Palestinian state. That isn't going to happen. Maybe, but I met with Yasser Arafat some time ago and he said, well, we'll try over the years, we'll see what we can do. Well, that's great, but they're not going to do it. And they can protest a little bit, but they won't win. And the Hamas will protest and they won't win. And Hezbollah will protest a little bit in Lebanon, but they won't win. And people will get back to normal. And the thing was, Israel has a capital. They're a sovereign state, and they have an absolute right to declare what is their capital. And Israel has been their capital since King David, almost 3,000 years ago. And so for them, the Arabs to say this is some kind of act of aggression. Now, the United Nations Security Council had a terrible vote where the United States should have stopped it and didn't, which declared that all those territories were occupied by the Israelis and that everything prior to 1967 should be declared occupational territory and occupied territory, I should say, excuse me. And it's not occupied, it's the nation of Israel. And this is Judea and Samaria. And Israel has been their capital, and all the president did was acknowledge what everybody has known. So it's time for the Arabs to get over it, and they will. Given a couple of weeks, they'll have a couple of days of protest, and then they'll get back to work. And everything will go back to normal, and that's just the way it ought to be. Now, we've got, you know, I wrote a book called The End of the Age. It had to do with an asteroid 0.6 of a mile, 1 kilometer, and it hit the Earth, and it just changed everything. Well, a strange thing happened in space this last few days. Ephraim has that story.
Pat, a major asteroid passed close to Earth last month. The London Daily Mail reports the asteroid was 52 to 105 feet in diameter. It passed within 73,000 miles of Earth on November 9th, but NASA didn't spot it until a day later. If the rocket hit Earth, it could have wiped out life within an area of just under 4 miles from the impact. Sounds like a page out of science fiction, Pat.
Well, the book, again, The End of the Age, I don't know if it's still in print or not, but I had it all down there. But one tenth of a mile, 6/10 of a mile, 1 kilometer was all it took to essentially disrupt this Earth. And this was a smaller asteroid, but it came so close and NASA didn't even see it. The atmosphere around us is just loaded with these little bits of rock. They've been out there forever and ever. And the fact that we have an atmosphere that is relatively strong, but fortunately there's Jupiter, and Jupiter is so big it sucks these things toward itself rather than letting them hit Earth. And this was between us and the moon. It wasn't a very distant hit. It's one of those things that if it had hit, it would have wiped out a significant chunk of Earth. And we live in this kind of region, and we have to recognize we are dependent on the Lord. And if anybody thinks otherwise, they are crazy. This is a tiny, tiny little planet in the midst of a tiny, tiny little galaxy, in the midst of a tiny, tiny part of the vastness of this universe we live in. And we're subject to bombardment. As a matter of fact, they think that the Earth was hit by Mars, and it knocked off a chunk of Earth, and that's what became our moon. We need the moon, but it was hit by a planet to get there. And so these collisions are possible in space, and the Lord has just kept us safe and allowed humanity to flourish during a relatively small length of time. So we are vulnerable, and make no mistake about it, Terry, but I'm glad that thing didn't hit us.
Yeah, you'd like to think that it would be seen prior to passing.
Even if it was seen, there wasn't a thing you could do about it. I mean, that's the truth, you know. But anyhow, I'm glad that we were spared, even if NASA didn't see the thing.
Amen.
All right.